Juan Carlos Rocha Osornio is a professor at the University of Toronto in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese plus Latin American Studies.
Mexico means family for me. Being able to function socially, being able to interact and hold a conversation with people, not afraid of saying buenos dias, good morning to strangers. And I often joke about this with my students and I say, well, what happens when you go into an elevator, for example, here in Toronto?
Yeah.
People look down. It is the opposite in Mexico. It is an opportunity for us to find out about other people.
He's a Mexican native who left his home country at 16 and would later attend university in Texas, USA, where he received his bachelor's and master's degrees.
I was ashamed of being Mexican at one point because of all that animosity that I experienced in Texas.
Eventually, he would land in Western University, London, Ontario, where he completed his PhD in Hispanic Studies.
Western University offered me acceptance and I decided to go to Western, and I'm very happy that I made that decision.
In this episode, he shares his thoughts on the state of academia.
It's not just about getting a degree. It is about networking also.
What is the best way to learn a language, seeing as he speaks 5?
What's the best way to learn Spanish? First of all, you have to be patient. I don't have a magic stick. You come to Spanish, you speak Spanish. That will never happen.
Mexico's new and first female president.
It is controversial. It would be the first woman in the entire history of Mexico to become president. I wish her the best.
Illegal immigrants coming through the U.S.-Mexico border.
A lot of people going there, not just from Mexico now. A lot of people from South America, Central America, they cross through Mexico and then they arrive in the United States.
And I even get him to read some of his own student reviews.
The most attractive and intelligent Spanish professor I've ever had. Oh my goodness.
If you're new here, my name is Carter Ponce. This is the VoV podcast, University of Toronto's only independent student podcast. And I hope you enjoy the episode. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the VoV podcast, Voices of Vic. Today is an incredibly special episode number 75. We have our first professor coming on the podcast. I took his class in first year, second semester. It was a bit in the midst of COVID, but I am pleased and extremely grateful to have on Professor Juan Carlos Rocha Osornio. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Carter. Gracias. Hola, ¿cómo estás?
Bien. ¿Y tú?
Muy bien, gracias. ¿Hablas español?
Muy poquito, muy poco. I'm not there yet. I
but
told you before the cameras were on that I got bumped up to SPA 102, which I think is a good thing, you know?
Yeah.
I started in 101. I don't speak Spanish. I wouldn't consider myself a Spanish speaker, but apparently they thought the accent was good enough because I speak French, and we go from there.
All right.
So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, sure. It'll go well. Don't worry.
Absolutely. So just to give you a bit of a deeper introduction here, you are considered assistant professor of Spanish in the teaching stream at University of Toronto, but you've had a very, I guess, a career that's spanned across the globe, I'd almost say. You'd had your Bachelor of Arts in Spanish and English in Texas.
That's right.
At Texas A&M University Commerce, which is the Commerce's
campus.
Exactly. Not the program Commerce, but there's a city in Texas called Commerce.
Exactly.
Your Master's of Arts in Spanish Language, Literature, and Culture at Texas A&M as well. And then you got your PhD. So maybe I should have introduced you as Dr. Juan Carlos Rocha Osornio at Western University in Hispanic Studies.
Yeah.
So maybe we can go through all of that. Like, how's the journey been with reaching basically the peak of education? I don't know if maybe I'd say the peak, but for a lot of people, doctorate, PhD is the goal. So what motivated you to go all the way to get that?
Thank you. I think that's a very interesting question. I actually prepared for that one just in case you would ask that.
Awesome.
So I used to live in the United States. My family, my mom in particular, and my sister, we moved together when I was 16 years old. And for me, it was a big change compared to Mexico. When I used to live in Mexico, it was a cultural shock when I moved to the United States. Everything was different to what I was used to. And especially the cultural aspect, that's what shook me the most. I started to notice some aspects that I had never heard of before, such as the distinction between people based on skin color. And the distinction, some of the differences that people can make of others based on nationalities. So that had a profound effect on me. And it took me to undertake studies in Spanish literature and culture. And I did that in the United States. And then I decided that I didn't want to live there anymore. And I started looking for other countries to go to. And my first choice was actually the Netherlands.
Oh, wow.
I ended up not going there, but I got accepted into the University of Alberta in Edmonton. That was the first university that took me in. And then a few days later, Western University offered me acceptance, and I decided to go to Western. And I'm very happy that I made that decision.
That's incredible. That's incredible. So you mentioned the cultural shock of once you got to the US, all these distinctions of nationality and race. From the understanding I've received from my father, is that the race distinctions in Mexico are more related to class than simply, color of skin. Is that right?
That is correct.
So basically the idea would be darker skin is working out in the sun, meaning, poor labor workers. Whereas if you're fairer skin, that means you're probably in the office buildings and doing the maybe higher paying jobs.
That's right.
So what exactly about that shift? Because did you kind of experience any of that sort of race distinction in Mexico?
Not so much in Mexico, and these are some of the things that we also talked in the class that you took with me. That's More Than Nachos and Tequila, Mexican History and Culture. If anybody's interested, that's a first-year seminar. I did not experience that in Mexico, and that's probably because and these are some of the things that I'm always very interested in. Skin color changes based on culture, right? So for example, in Mexico, I would be considered white. Yeah. I would have that privilege in Mexico.
Right.
And then when I went to live in the United States, that privilege was taken away from me.
Yeah.
And it was a shock for me because I had never really thought about it. Even in Mexico, that never really, I knew that I had that privilege, but it was just, I never really thought about it until I moved to the United States.
Right.
So from one day to another, I was considered different. And it took me a while to process this. At one point, to be honest, and I've written about this on a newspaper in Spanish, actually, here in Toronto. I wrote about it that I didn't even feel like I was ashamed of being Mexican at one point because of all that animosity that I experienced in Texas.
Yeah.
With this, I'm not saying that I don't want to go back there and that I hate it and that, it was just something that I experienced, but it doesn't mean that it's like that all the time,
Absolutely.
So that was pretty difficult for me. And it took me several years to digest that. Once I started studying Spanish, my bachelor's degree in Spanish, it was also a search for my identity.
Yeah.
And that it was sort of like a healing process for me that culminated with my PhD.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible. What do you think is like the root of these racial distinctions? Because I feel like, especially today, the conversation in the political world, at least, seems to revolve around race recently. Like a lot of the time, it goes back and forth. We talk about a bunch of different things, gender issues, race issues. Those are like the social problems. Talk about the economy a lot. We talk about, wars, foreign affairs, that kind of thing. It seems like now, at least from what I've kind of been seeing online and Twitter and that kind of thing, is a lot of, talk about race. And it's something I maybe thought about more in high school because, once again, the conversation was perhaps big in that time. Maybe it's died down a little bit, but it's coming back up, I feel. And for me, like I always say, a huge I think, pillar of why racism does exist is language barrier. I feel like, especially, let's say in Canada, the large immigrant population now comes from India. And I feel like if perhaps the local Canadians and the Indian immigrants could speak fluently with each other, they would understand they actually aren't so different after all. It's just a problem of we don't know how to communicate our ideas into each other's heads. Did you think that that could be a thing where perhaps, Southern Americans in the South, because there's a language barrier, they might not understand as much how to deal with the Mexican immigrants, so it ends in perhaps racial discrimination?
Yeah, it is all based on pure ignorance,
Right.
but it is also, the United States and Mexico have a long history that
Absolutely.
dates back many, many years, many centuries.
Yes.
At one point, Texas was part of Mexico. You studied that in my course. So there's always been this antagonistic rivalry between the two countries.
Yeah.
Lately, the issue of immigration, a lot of people going there, not just from Mexico now.
Right.
A lot of people from South America, Central America, they are crossing the they cross through Mexico,
Yeah.
and then they arrive in the United States. You also have all these the current candidate that wants to be the president of the United States again, saying that Mexicans are bad people, that Mexicans are rapists. So of course that is going to fuel people's emotions, and the problem just doesn't get solved, and it will never get solved if that continues to be there. It's pure ignorance. It is a lack of understanding, really, of what Mexico is really all about. A lot of people think that the minute that you go to Mexico, you're going to be killed. All these really violent scenes that we seem to have, that we seem to accept as it is the reality, the truth. And I'm not saying that things don't happen in Mexico. They do.
Yeah.
Just like here, I live in North York, and not too long ago, there was a shooting also. Some innocent students, young people, they just died there.
Yeah.
So these things happen everywhere in the world. And I talk about this in all my classes, in my Spanish language courses. You cannot separate language learning from culture. When you're learning, in this case, Spanish, you have to also learn about the cultural aspects of that target language that you are practicing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was the main point, at least like the number one thing I took away from that was the ignorance aspect. And it's not necessarily about like refuting, like you said, it's not like nothing happens in Mexico. I have on these notes here, I'm going to talk about later, like there are cities that are known for being dangerous, and especially with like the cartel problems and that kind of thing, it's not necessarily about refuting those issues and being like, no, their danger is not a problem. It's more about understanding that like Mexico is like, just think about your home country. Think of Canada if you're Canadian, or the US if you're American. There are wildly different groups of people in Canada. You know what I mean? You have your, I guess if you want to talk politically, you have your more liberal Canadians in perhaps the city and metropolitan areas, and you have your conservative oil farmer in Alberta. Sorry, so to just lump them all together of saying Mexicans are this, there's a culture, of course, but some people in Mexico decide to commit crime and some don't. This is just how every place works. And obviously, another problem is that it's exposure. Like you said, not only are Mexicans coming down to the border, but it's actually largely people from all over the world. South America, I hear even Chinese people are coming, flying to land in Mexico and cross because the border is open for people to come in. And I would like to think that people are, tuned in enough to understand that it's not Mexicans, it's everywhere. Everyone is coming in. And that's another thing we can talk about how like people perhaps might not have the time to learn these political issues. Perhaps it doesn't affect them so much. So they just, because they don't necessarily care about it as much, they just, go off what's the top of their head. Oh yeah, they're coming through Mexico, they must be Mexican.
Right.
Just kind of a quick decision. They don't care that much, but they'll say it because that's what they think is true. They might be right, they might not.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's very interesting.
Yeah. Now that you're mentioning this, there are people that think that Mexicans, for example, that we speak Mexican.
Yeah. Absolutely.
We do speak Spanish. It is the official language of Mexico, but there are other indigenous languages that are spoken. Over 30 indigenous languages spoken in Mexico. So that's also part of the ignorance problem here. That there's this image of Mexico sometimes as just being this place where you can get away and do what you cannot do here, and party and drink and all of that. But you can do that there. You can do it here in Canada too. You can do it anywhere you want. So, but I think that adds to that problem of just not really wanting to look close at what Mexico really is all about. Mexico is not just about tequila. My course, More Than Nachos and Tequila, is not just that. It's about many, many things. Canada is not just about poutine or hockey or the cold. People think here that it never gets hot. Today it's pretty warm.
Yeah, absolutely.
So students that sometimes come to visit our campus from other countries, from Mexico, for example, they get surprised when they notice this kind of weather, because they have that that stereotype of Canada that it's always cold here. But no, we have 4 seasons, at least here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what does Mexico mean to you then? What does it mean?
Mexico means family for me. It means being able to function socially, being able to interact and hold a conversation with people. Yeah. Being not afraid of saying buenos dias, good morning to strangers. That's one thing that I'm not able to get used to sometimes here in Canada. And I often joke about this with my students, and I say, well, what happens when you go into an elevator, for example, here in Toronto?
Yeah.
People look down. It is the opposite in Mexico. Yeah. It is an opportunity for us to find out about other people.
Yeah.
And how are you? Starting with that very basic question that I think most people seem to take for granted. And it is a way of being showing empathy towards other people and to connect. And I think that's one thing that the more that time passes, we are just losing. And it is a shame, I think.
Absolutely. I completely agree. The elevator example is perfect because I live in this residence building, 8 floors. Sometimes you go up in the elevator and it's a lot of that. Right. And I try to break it just because it's like, for me, it's kind of awkward. And you know what I mean? I wouldn't want to ever be caught out, for example, especially because I have this podcast. I think there's a little bit more pressure because if anyone, all it takes is one person. If one person is in that elevator and I seem like this sociable, like conversational guy on camera, and then in the elevator I don't even say hi or what's up or that kind of thing, then they might be, oh yeah, Carter's like this on the podcast, but in real life he's actually an ass. So, I try to just engage a little bit, nothing too crazy, because maybe people want to be left to themselves, but
Correct.
It's tough. And I think especially in this digital age too, that doesn't help.
Absolutely.
Do you think that would affect the Mexican culture, for example?
It does affect too, but I would say to a lesser extent than here.
Right.
Of course, things change, it is inevitable. Change is part of humanity. But I feel that here, I don't know if it's because of the winter sometimes, that people tend to just really keep to themselves. Because I notice also the difference in the summer. Have you noticed that? Like in the summers, people seem to maybe smile a little bit more. Yeah. But these are cultural aspects, that it's not so easy to say, oh, I want all Canadians to be like Mexicans. No, that's not what I'm saying. Like the culture in Mexico is about being social. That's what it means to me, being Mexican, being social. And here in Canada, you may not find that as often as you do in countries like Mexico. but it also doesn't mean that it is wrong, like I think that's also part of learning a language, that you have to learn about these social aspects. It is, if you can learn Spanish, for example, you're taking Spanish 102 right now, and you can build your vocabulary, your grammar structures, and all of that. But at the end, if you're not able to know how we function as a culture, people will misunderstand you.
Absolutely.
If you go to Mexico, and even if you speak fluent Spanish and you don't say buenos dias, to the lady in the corner that's selling juice, for example, they're going to think that you're a pretty rude person, that you are you're just not going to fit in.
Absolutely.
And that is something that I try to teach always to my students. It's not just about vocabulary and grammar. It's beyond that. It's more than that.
100%.
Yeah.
There's a quote that I want to bring up, actually. I should have had this prepared, but it's one of my favorite, I guess, I don't know if you call it a Mexican quotes, but my dad first told it to me in Spanish, so I attribute it to Mexico. And it's his, I guess, kind of approach or his view on how you should act when you're in another country that's not your own, or when you're in another person's house, for example. In English, the quote is, when in Rome, do as the Romans. Right. In Spanish, it's donde fueres, haz lo que vieres, of course. And this is something that I think about when I'm considering, for example, moving to Mexico for a year. I feel like it would be my responsibility to learn somewhat the customs and the behaviors and the traditions, like just saying buenos dias to the lady making the juice, because that's, of course, when bad stereotypes start to happen, because you go into someone else's home. You go into Mexico as a native Canadian. Of course, I'm half Mexican, but I've never embraced the culture too deeply yet. So you go into someone else's home and you, once again, are seen as this rude person. Now the Mexicans think, all Canadians don't even say buenos dias. They ignore you in the elevator, and it's a mess. And this is maybe full circle, as we were talking about at the start, how the Americans had a bad view on the Mexicans. When you move to Texas, it could be the same thing. I go into Mexico, now Mexicans have a bad view of Canadians because they don't align with the customs. And that's something that I think is very important to consider when it comes to immigration, especially if you are looking to move to a different country. So I guess to pull it into a Canadian context, for example, when you moved from Mexico to the US to Canada, of course, when you're in the US, you're young, you're a kid, that's a little bit different. But when you moved to Canada, for example, did you think that at all? Were you trying to think, what are the Canadian customs and traditions so I'm not out of place?
Yes. Before I moved to London, Ontario, I started researching about the city where I was going to live for the next 4 years that I ended up living there while I was doing my PhD. So I was reading about, first, I didn't know London is called the forest city, for example. So lots of parks, lots of trees, lots of forest. And that gave me the idea that it was a good place to do outdoor sports, for example. So I started reading about the economy. I started reading about also the English that is spoken here in Canada. It is slightly different than the Texan English, for example. Right. When I first moved to Canada, I think some people used to think that I had a Texan accent. Now I don't think I do. It's been 15 years, by the way, that I've been here now. But for me, it was important to research about what Canada was all about, because I knew that it was a different country. And this is often also a misunderstanding between Canada and the United States. Some people in the United States think that Canada is the same. Yeah. And that you just cross the border, but it's the same kind of people. And no, it's a different country. And one of the most shocking thing that I experienced upon my arrival at Pearson Airport on August 27th, 2009, I remember that day clearly. I still have that passport with a stamp on it. The immigration agent that processed my study permit and everything, she said to me, "Welcome to Canada." That to me was shocking, because in all my experiences before that, going to other countries, nobody had actually told me welcome.
Wow.
and the officer was smiling, like she really meant it. Like, I hope so, right? But she really made me feel like welcome.
Yeah.
So that was shocking for me. I had never heard, and I go back to Mexico often through the United States now, and nobody ever says welcome to me.
Yeah.
I travel on a Canadian passport now. They just look at it briefly and then they just throw it back at me and go.
Yeah.
But I never heard a welcome, at least in my experience. I don't know if some people have, but
no, that's incredible.
Yeah.
That's good. And that's another lesson. Huge props to that Canadian woman who welcomed Professor Juan Carlos. But I think that that's a lesson for everybody in terms of perhaps promoting your own ideas, your own culture, your own identity even. Like, let's say I'm Canadian and I want to paint a good picture of Canadians. Let's say I'm a proud Canadian. I think Canada's the best country in the world. The best way for me to convey that is to be a good person and to portray myself in a way that's honorable and respectable and disciplined and hardworking. All the good qualities that I think should define what a Canadian means. Mm-hmm. And I get this from, I don't know if I got this from, but I've heard the same thing from my cousin. She's currently in Virginia studying at Liberty University. It's a very Christian school. It's a very Christian university. She wasn't Christian when she got there. I don't know if she would call herself Christian now, but basically she plays on a hockey team. And the idea, I asked her, I was like, how do you, I guess, promote your faith? How does the school encourage its students to promote Christianity because they're a Christian school? And she's like, it's not about asking, friends or asking, let's say, players on the other team to come do a Bible study after, like, at the end of the game. It's not like that. It's more just about how you carry yourself. It's about being good to people time and time again to a point where they eventually realize, why is this person so good? Mm-hmm. And then you say, oh, I'm Christian, or I'm Canadian, or I'm Mexican, whatever it is that you want to, I guess, portray as your identity and the reason why you are acting the way you are. And I think that's a great way to go about it. So once again, props to that woman. So we can...
if she's watching, thank you.
Absolutely. Shout out. Thank you very much. I want to talk more about growing up in Mexico.
Sure.
And maybe I'll start with, why did you move in the first place?
To the United States?
Yeah.
Because my parents divorced.
Okay.
My parents divorced, and my mother had family in the United States that had immigrated there from like many years before. So my parents divorced, and then my mom made the decision of moving to the United States with us, and that's how we ended up going there.
Okay, trying to get as far away as possible. I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
No, that was really what happened. Like, okay, let's start all over. Yeah, my mom wanted to start all over, and we started all over.
There you go.
Yeah, we did.
So tell me more. Okay, so that's moving. Growing up, what was childhood like? When were you born, actually? I don't know.
Which year?
1983.
I'm 40. I know I don't look like 40, but I'm
Absolutely.
40. I'll be 41 in December. So,
there you go. Yeah. Okay, so growing up in the 80s and the 90s.
Right.
What was that like?
It was very nice. And I'm actually watching a TV program now on Amazon Prime that it's called Nadie nos va a extrañar. Nobody's going to miss us. And it's the story of a group of school-aged teenagers set in the 90s in Mexico.
Okay.
And it is totally my childhood.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So when I started watching that, I was like, there were times when I was like, that's me. That's me. That's me. It was a different Mexico. I can tell you that. Different Mexico than what it is now. It was, I would say, a very good time for children to grow up in that decade of the 90s, 80s. Very quiet. I remember playing out in the street with other kids from the same neighborhood, and you would never be worried about something happening to you.
Yeah.
It was a happy childhood. My parents had some problems, but it was a good time to live in.
Yeah. That's awesome.
I was always interested though in foreign languages, in English. I was fascinated by English. So that also made me want to go and explore other countries. And when I moved to United States, I was very excited. I already spoke English before I moved to United States. But when I moved there, I was finally able to become what's called fluent.
Yeah.
That really pushed me to really understand a lot of things that in Mexico I don't think I could have done.
Yeah.
Starting with the accent, the Texan accent, it is challenging.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I don't know if this is true, but I saw in your biography page here on the U of T website that you speak 5 languages. Is this true?
No, it's a lie, but no, it is true. Of course.
It is true. Okay, there you go. English, Spanish, French, Portuguese, and Italian.
In Italian, yeah.
That's incredible. That's huge. Okay, so the word of the day. I don't know if you know what this word is, but the word of the day is polyglot.
Yeah, I do.
You do know?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know this word anyways.
Yeah.
That would be a great way to describe you.
Yeah.
So I asked you, I don't know if I asked you over email or no, I think I asked you during our course, what's the best way to learn Spanish? What's the fastest way to learn Spanish? And you told me you got to live in a Spanish-speaking area, country. So this is why I'm now considering moving to Mexico for a year to kind of fast-track that process. But you were able to pick up all those other languages without necessarily living there. What was that like? How long did that take you to learn Italian and French? Because I'm thinking you didn't live in France.
Right. Okay, so first of all, what's the best way to learn a language? That's the $1 million question.
Right.
Nobody really knows. Like, there are different approaches, but I would say that it depends on your level of motivation. If you're really motivated, if you see the added value of learning that language, then it's going to be faster.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, and I just had a student last night in my intermediate Spanish language class asking me, what can I do? What do I need to do? Because I already took this course and I dropped it and I'm trying again. What's the best way to learn Spanish? I'm like, first of all, you have to be patient. This is not like a 3-minute deal that you're going to come to my class or 1 semester or 1 year and then, I don't have a magic stick.
Yeah.
Like, you come to Spanish, you speak Spanish. That will never happen.
Yeah.
So it has to do a lot with motivation. I was very motivated to learn English, and I used to watch programs on TV all the time in English. No subtitles. The internet was just starting at that time.
Yep.
So right now we have a lot of good things with technology that can help us learn languages. But somehow it seems that all of that technology is really setting us back, because when students want to look up the meaning of a word, instead of sometimes they ask me, so what does that mean? Like, I have no problem telling you, right?
Yeah.
But in the effort of looking that up, this is how you learn that vocabulary.
Right.
And now it's so easy. You just look it up on Google.
Yeah.
Any translator, electronic translator. I didn't have that. I actually had the big dictionaries where I had to look that up. Yeah. That's the only way, So I also think that moving to the country where the language is spoken, that should be the ultimate goal of anybody that wants to be fluent. I've picked up on French, Italian, Portuguese, because I've had relationships with people from these countries.
Got it.
And that's also one of the advices that I give to my students. Get yourself a boyfriend or a girlfriend that speaks Spanish.
Yeah.
You're going to learn a lot.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Has any student ever taken that advice?
Yes, some of them have.
That's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Coming back to you.
Have had a student who ended up marrying somebody from Venezuela.
There you go.
Yeah.
You must have been invited. Did they not invite you to the wedding?
No, they didn't invite me.
Awful.
Really awful.
Yeah. So, that's incredible. Okay, so I gotta do that. It's interesting because you mentioned the technology. It's true, but it's a double-sided sword where, like, yes, the technology is here to help. I'm working on Duolingo. I'm on a 139-day streak. And
there you go.
You would think that you'd get there at that point. But anyways, no, it takes a long time. And you have things like that, Google Translate, Duolingo, these things to help you. But at the same time, this increase in technology has like had a huge negative effect on people's attention spans.
Yes.
And the idea of sitting down and being like, I'm going to learn an entirely new way to speak. A lot of kids nowadays just don't have that drive or that like will, or maybe even they want it, but their brains can't focus long enough to be able to figure it out.
Yeah.
And it's a huge commitment. But yeah, no, I think people motivated by like a true reason, like for me, obviously I have a reason. Half of my family's Mexican. I want to be able to speak to them and not have my dad translate, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think when people are motivated by that, then they'll get there. Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's, it doesn't mean that when you learn a language, you're going to learn it 100%.
Right.
That's also one of what I often see with my students, that they think that, for example, I have students that are at Rodman. They're doing commerce, for example. They're doing economics. They want to go out into the corporate world and make a lot of money. Perfect. And then they want to take Spanish. Then they probably want to make business with people in Latin America or in the Spanish-speaking world. And they think that they need to be able to understand everything. No. If you are just able to have a conversation with someone when you're trying to close a deal, for example, in Mexico, for example, and they take you out for dinner, but if you can just say hola, hello, make some maybe jokes, people are going to like you. And this is the power of learning a language, because you connect with people.
Absolutely.
But it doesn't mean that you have to be fluent. Everything that you know in your first language, that somehow you're going to be able to say it in your second language. No, it's pretty difficult to do that. Yeah. My first language is Spanish. Of course, my second is English. But it doesn't mean that I know every single thing that I do in Spanish in English.
Right.
So
absolutely.
Yeah.
I took French for years. Like University of Toronto, I always say, is my first English school. So my elementary school and high school, both like full French. You got in trouble if you spoke English. And I always sometimes wonder, like, do people think in language? Like when I speak French, because I always consider like I'm speaking French, but like when I'm speaking French, are my thoughts English? It's very strange how language might play a role in our thinking. Like, because I look at my dad, for example. My dad, he's been speaking English and mainly English for about 20 years, but he'll still sleep talk in Spanish. Like when he's asleep dreaming, he'll sometimes, and it's Spanish.
Right.
So I'm like, there has to be something ingrained of like where you have a mother tongue, and that's like what you process everything in, right? So like, do you have that? Do you think in Spanish? Do you think about that ever?
I think that it depends on when you speak several languages, you develop different personalities too.
Right.
Which is also something that I'm very fascinated with, because I do sound very different in Spanish than in English. Like now that I'm speaking to you and I'm thinking about this, I sound like more calm. Yeah. But when I'm speaking Spanish, it's like I can raise my voice a little bit more. I can, of course, I would feel more comfortable. Yeah. But it depends on the situation. Sometimes, right now, I'm thinking fully in English right now to do this interview. But when I'm with people that speak Spanish, my mind will be fully in Spanish. Right. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, Italian the same, French the same. So
absolutely.
But everybody handles it differently.
Yeah. So I have some questions about education as a whole. That was the camera. We're going to take the break. This is a perfect point to kind of pause 5 minutes real quick. If you need the bathroom, it's over there, and we'll jump back into it.
Great.
Okay, back at it after a short break there. One last thing I want to touch on for Mexican culture. Okay. Talk about it the whole episode, but we'll diversify here, is La Dia de los Muertos, which is something that we talked about in our course. And I think that celebration, that holiday, perfectly kind of sums up the contrast between Mexican and Canadian culture. So I guess when I say that, one aspect is humor, the humor in it, and the fact that maybe Canadians would be like, how could you make fun of death? How could you, make light of such a situation that's meant to be seen as tragic, and people are in mourning and this kind of thing. but then also just, I think that Canadian culture has kind of lost, maybe not completely lost, but lost hold or lost grip of the idea of honoring your ancestors and honoring your predecessors, your family, your parents, this kind of thing. And yeah, I just think that it's a great celebration, a great thing to talk about. I wish we had something like that. But what's your relationship with the holiday? Because I watched your CTV clip there before. I watched it obviously when I took your course, but I rewatched it today just to kind of get an idea and remember of what the celebration's all about.
It's one of my favorite holidays in Mexico, and that's also something that has made me, I don't want to say well known here at the university, but I started doing Day of the Dead at the University of Toronto. This had never been done here. So I came in 2016 and I set up the Day of the Dead altar at Victoria College.
Yeah.
And from there, I've been doing it every year. This year, I won't be able to do it because I am the president of the American Association of Teachers of Spanish and Portuguese, and we have our annual conference around that date.
Got it.
So I won't be able to do it this year, but Day of the Dead to me means honoring people that are no longer here physically, but we still remember them. Mm-hmm. And also not forgetting, like I said in the interview, that we're all going to be gone one day or another.
Yeah.
You know, and that is something that in Mexico, at least, we keep very present in our minds. By this, I'm not saying that all we think about is death. Like, okay, it could be today, like it could be tomorrow, but we don't really seem to be afraid of it. I'm not afraid of it. I think that it is something natural that's going to happen to us. And we must not forget the people that meant a lot to us. When it's their time to go, they're still with us.
Absolutely.
And that's one way of remembering them and honoring them. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah, sorry, the Day of the Dead, I think that a great aspect of it was learning the festivities that took place that take place, obviously. Food, drinks, activities that the dead enjoyed in their life. Mm-hmm. That's amazing. And the dead, I just have some notes here, sorry. The dead are also remembered with ofrendas. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yeah, very good.
Which
ofrendas,
are the
offerings.
Altars, right? Honoring that person.
Yeah. And
once again, as you said in that interview, the symbol of Day of the Dead is Katrina, which is the embodiment of death.
That's right.
Right? So, okay. So I just wanted to clarify and all that. But I think it's good. I think
it is good. And you know, that's also the reason why Mexico is also, after the James Bond movie, what's the name of it? The Spectre.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. That's how people started noticing Day of the Dead.
Right.
Like Day of the Dead has been around for many years. It's a celebration in Mexico. But after that movie, people started noticing more the celebration and Mexico as a whole.
Right.
So now you have this parade, the Day of the Dead parade in Mexico City, and that's because of that movie.
Wow.
That was not what we used to do.
Yeah.
So I think it's good, but at the same time, you run into situations like the movie Coco, which is produced by an outsider. It's produced by the United States, I believe, and it's like, why can't the Mexicans do that? You know, you have to be very careful with these aspects. Yeah, for example, like, why does it have to be other people looking at this tradition and making it famous around the world?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So the bag, for example, here, if you want to show that maybe to the viewers, that's the Day of the Dead. But look who came up with that. That's Marshalls in the side.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah. It's not from Mexico. So it's like they're taking that and they're appropriating that image and they're marketing it but that has nothing to do with, you know.
Do you think that that's a problem? Do you think that because there is that talk with cultural appropriation, which people here talk about a lot, and it's like become an issue now. Schools are banning certain costumes and this kind of thing. I wonder what you think about it. I feel like for me personally, I don't like when it comes to marshals and that kind of thing. That's a different conversation when you're talking about corporations and marketing and profiting off of the celebration of different countries. That's like a more complicated issue. But when it comes to like something like Halloween costume, for example, I feel like if a kid wanted to dress up as like, I don't know, a Mexican and wear a sombrero, and
happens
this kind
all
of
the
thing.
time.
Yeah, like I personally don't see the issue with that. Do you think that that's a problem?
That's a very good question. Now, like if you ask me now, do I think it's a problem? I don't see a problem now necessarily, but before I used to be very offended with that.
Got it.
Yeah.
How come?
Because it's also a way of perpetuating the stereotype of Mexicans, which are, you know, we talked about that in the course, chubby type of people with the big sombrero, the mustache. We do have people like that, but it doesn't mean that everybody is like that. Right? So you have to be careful too with that. But I guess all the time that I've lived here in Canada, I'm starting to see it differently. For me, what's more important is about respecting others. Mm-hmm. So if you feel comfortable with that, go for it, you know? But also, as long as you don't forget that can be also offensive to some people. Right? Like I might not take a lot of offense now, but I'm sure that my mom, like if she were to come here to Canada and see a kid out in the street Halloween, she would be like, well, why are they doing this?
Interesting.
So it depends on the perspective of people.
That's interesting. Yeah. So I was going to say, like, if you went to Mexico and you asked, because there was a video that went around of a guy who did that, like it was a social experiment where he went to university campuses and said, what do you think about this? And he's like a white guy wearing like a Mexican whole thing, sombrero, everything, poncho. And he was asking like, what do you think about this? And the students at the university were like, that's racist. This is like culturally appropriation, blah, blah, blah. And then he did the same thing in Mexico. And all the local Mexicans are like, it's fine. Don't worry, blah, blah, blah. Right. So like, I don't know, like in Mexico, do you think that there is probably just a 50-50 split? Maybe that was a clever video crafted in a way. Do you think some people in Mexico would take offense?
Very few people. Very few. Yeah. Okay. I think most people would be like, oh, he's fun. Yeah, he's funny. He's trying to be funny. And in Mexico, we like to be funny, right? You know, it's part of our culture. We like to make jokes. So but there would be some people that might be offended, but not a lot. I don't think so.
Got it. Yeah. Okay.
Because for us, when we see foreigners trying to, for example, imitate Mexicans, and it's like that's cool. You like it. You're interested in our culture one way or another.
Absolutely.
Do it.
Absolutely. Yeah. 100%. I feel that too. In other news, I guess, this episode is going to be airing on October 6th, I believe, so quite a while. But I wanted to save it for 75 because that's like a milestone episode, and it'd be great to have you for 75.
Thank you.
And so October 6th, which would be 5 days after the new president of Mexico is going to assume office. Which is the first female elected president of Mexico.
Yes.
What do you think about this? Wow. Do you have any views? Is it controversial? I don't know.
It is controversial. I think it's great to have a woman as president. It would be the first woman in the entire history of Mexico to become president. I wish her the best. It is the political party that she's affiliated with, in my opinion, from my perspective, needs to get some things together.
Yep.
López Obrador, the current president that belongs to the same party, he's actually the most popular president in the entire history of Mexico.
Interesting.
And that's great. But I think that there's a lot of division in Mexico now because of this. And I don't like that.
Yeah.
I don't like it when a president causes these things. I think that a president should be able to unify everybody, do his or her best to have that. And I think the country is really is very polarized I don't agree with that.
Interesting. Yeah, because from what I've heard, she is very much like, once again, same party and is going to lead in a similar way from what I've heard. So people are thinking not much is going to change. It's a new face. Of course, it's a woman president, first in the history. But yeah, like she's like a huge supporter of him. So it's going to be kind of just a smooth transition and well, smooth in the sense that nothing's going to change, but perhaps things do need to change. I don't know.
They do need to change. One question that was often asked to the current president, López Obrador, was about the disappearance of thousands of people every day. People that are being recruited into the cartels. Yep. And he never really wants to answer that question. And he gets very confrontational.
Yep. Confrontational. Right? Yeah.
Confrontational. Every time that reporters ask him about it. Well, it is his job to give a proper answer.
Absolutely.
And when journalists ask him, so there are these many people that have disappeared and their families are looking for them. What is your government doing? Well, in my government, this is not really happening. And, so he needs to give an answer. She needs to give an answer also for this, because a lot of people have disappeared in Mexico. Yeah. Not just Mexicans. Immigrants, for example, that are crossing through Mexico. I'm from central Mexico, Querétaro. A lot of people cross through there because it's right in the middle of Mexico. So they have to go through there. And then they get closer to the border with the United States, and then they disappear. Because the cartels recruit these people to work for them. They force them. And if they don't want to work, sometimes they get killed. So the government needs to be held accountable for this.
Yeah, absolutely. And trafficking too is a huge issue, and that could also be a thing there. And another, we want to talk about stereotypes. Another stereotype of this is that Mexico is incredibly corrupt, and
it is.
Obviously, that's the thing. That's the thing, is that stereotypes sometimes can be true, and you have issues where, I don't know, once again, I'm not involved. I don't pay attention to the Mexican political scene. Perhaps I should. That's where half my family's from. But I hear a lot of the time is that there's suspicion that people in government are working with the cartel. And it's not even about a fact of, it's like there's a rivalry between the government and the cartel. The cartel clearly, for people that don't know, I'm under the assumption the cartel is more powerful than the government in Mexico, right? So you would have to think that, my impression was that the government is kind of, gets bossed around, but perhaps they're not getting bossed around. Perhaps they're in conjunction. Perhaps they're doing deals, and this is the kind of thing you got to worry about as a citizen. And
corruption is very ingrained in our culture too. Let's not deny that.
In Canadian culture.
In all cultures, I think.
Yeah.
In all cultures, but I can tell you from the Mexican perspective, it's part of our culture from many, many centuries ago.
Yeah.
Right? So it is a problem that is not going to be fixed tomorrow or with a new president.
Yeah.
This is part of our DNA.
Right.
So, when you make promises as a candidate to say, I'm going to get rid of this corruption aspect, it's like saying, I'm going to get rid of our culture.
Right.
That's not going to happen.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's tough. Yeah. And like Westerners, like North Americans, like, obviously, there's another problem, is that people don't consider Mexico North America, even though it is North America. So that's another thing. But US, Canada, we have this image of Mexico being like just completely corrupt head to toe. But like sometimes you just got to look in the mirror. There's clear corruption in the US and in Canada. But I think the difference is perhaps the threshold for corruption is just much higher.
Yeah.
Only in Canada you can be corrupt if you're the political elite, whereas in Mexico, if you get caught for speeding, you pay the police officer $50, you go on your way.
Yes.
Just because the corruption is more accessible doesn't make it worse, perhaps. Like, you're just, in Canada, you're going to get more likely to get screwed over by a speeding ticket if you're a single mom.
Yeah.
So, and we're going to talk about corruption in Mexico, whereas, the common man can perhaps participate, whereas in Canada, only the richest of the rich top political people can kind of involve themselves in the corruption. So it's a very interesting conversation to compare the two.
Yeah.
And yeah, so we'll see.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there are. You're speaking of getting a speeding ticket, for example. In Mexico, it rarely happens, And if you get stopped, you can work your way there with a policeman and say, "Okay, I'm going to give you this money," instead of that money going to the government, because who knows what they're going to do with that anyway.
Yeah.
You just give it to the police and they let you go. Yeah. But what happens when a Mexican that is used to that comes to Canada and gets a ticket?
Right.
It's probably the first and the last time that person gets a ticket, because then they understand that here that aspect is more regulated, and that they're really paying more attention than in Mexico.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
Those things that you used to get away with, not so much here.
Yeah.
And then you start acting more like, okay, you just follow the rules of that new place that you call home.
Absolutely. Yeah. And perhaps I didn't word it perfectly. That wasn't even my what I said earlier about the corruption difference. It wasn't even my own idea. I heard it from somebody else. But it's just that fact of like in Canada, if the Mexican came here, got the speeding ticket, he'd get fined, he'd learn his lesson. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you were the family member of a prime minister or a president and you got the same speeding ticket, you're getting let off.
Right.
It's just a lot harder to kind of be corrupt, which is in a way almost more corrupt. Anyways, that's a discussion for another day.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about education and academia and university, and maybe we can contrast that as well with how education, that kind of thing, is perceived in Mexico versus in Canada here. Mm-hmm. I know for a very long time, the idea has been you work in high school to get good grades, and then you go to university, and once you graduate university, you get your degree, you get a good job. Now I feel we're seeing attendance rates kind of decrease. It's going from 70% maybe a decade ago, it's dropping. You see it like slowly ticking down, and it's like, what's happening? Why is the trend reversing? Why are less people going to university? And another way to look at it is the gender demographics are switching. It used to be mainly men in university. Now it's mainly women. University of Toronto is 55% women and 45% men. And just looking at, I guess, let's say the big media figures that young men are watching these days, guys like Elon Musk, for example, is a huge talking head in 2024. And he's saying, to work at Tesla, like, you don't need a college degree. We'll consider you if you even graduated from high school. So maybe like kids nowadays are reconsidering, should I go to university? Should I not? What do you think about that? If a young person, man or woman, came to you and asked about whether or not they should attend university?
I think that definitely people need to attend university, but it's not just about getting a degree.
Got it.
It is about networking also.
Absolutely.
Very important. And I cannot stress this enough in my classes. And I teach Spanish as a foreign language, mainly literature course too, and Mexican history and culture. But I always talk about the importance of networking.
Yeah.
I tend to do a lot of group activities all the time in my classes, and it is a way to show them how to work with people.
Right.
If we don't learn how to do that, then it's going to be challenging in the future. Mm-hmm. The idea of going to university and thinking that you're going to finish and get a job right away and make money and just have your future all solved, that is not happening.
Yeah.
But that's also why you have to be social. We work with people. No matter what we do in life.
Yeah.
I'm a professor. I work with people.
Yeah.
I work with a lot of people. I'm in the service industry. Teaching is considered part of the service industry.
Yep.
If I don't get along with my students, do you think I'm going to be successful? No.
Right.
If I don't enjoy my job, people are going to notice that. Mm-hmm. Students, you're a student. You notice right away when someone who's teaching your class really likes his or her job.
Yeah.
So it's extremely important to meet people and make the connection. That is ultimately what's going to set you apart from those that get a job or not.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to take another short break, and we'll jump back into it.
when you travel and you meet other kind of people different than what you're used to in your everyday setting, you start to think about other things that you never thought about. You go to Mexico, for example, and then you see the example earlier, this woman selling, you don't say buenos dias, good morning, she's selling juice in the corner of a street. And you start thinking, well, that woman, who is she? Why is she doing this here? And then you find out a little bit more about that person. If you pass by that street every day and you say buenos dias, then she might be opening to you and say, well, I have 3 kids, I have to support them, my husband left me, things like those, that maybe they will help you realize that, the world isn't just about you and your comfort zone and your, coffee every morning and all those things that we take, like it's part of us. I think that traveling, meeting people, talking to people, and listening, that's one thing that many people realize, that don't realize how important it is. Listening, the power of listening to other people. It's not just I, and yo. It's also about the other and what the other has to say. I think that would be a way for students, for people to realize things that they never thought about, and hopefully that's going to take them to in a different path.
Absolutely.
And then if it doesn't end up working out, oh well, it's life. You go back maybe to the first plan, but who knows? Not too long ago, I went to a conference in San Miguel de Allende, which is a very colonial town in the state of Guanajuato, right next to my hometown. And I met a lady from the UK who's been living in Mexico for 40 years now. And she said that she was a university student in England. And then she just decided to travel. And she ended up meeting her husband, Mexican husband. And they have a very prominent business, an art business there. She speaks Spanish fluently. And she comes from a very small town in England. She never imagined herself living in Mexico, in San Miguel de Allende, and having a Mexican husband, So when you step outside of your comfort zone, you never know what's going to happen to you. I believe good things will happen to you. If I didn't, for example, studied English, I wouldn't be... To start off, I wouldn't be teaching Spanish. I teach Spanish, but it doesn't mean that I don't need to speak English.
Right.
I wouldn't be in this podcast if I didn't speak English.
Right.
So that's one way of seeing this.
Yeah, absolutely. That story of that woman from England sounds like a lot like my mom when she moved for a year of school in Mexico. I bet she didn't expect she was going to get a husband there either, but she did. And now I'm here. So there you go.
Exactly.
It's crazy.
It really is.
Yeah. So anyways, this has been a fantastic episode. If you're okay with it, I do have some anonymous student reviews that I've printed out that are about you. Obviously, you're going to get my, what's the word? My endorsement. Okay. You're going to get my endorsement because anytime someone brings up top 3 best professors you've ever had at U of T, Professor Juan Carlos always in the top 3. So don't align me with any of the bad reviews, but I got some good ones. I got some bad ones. If you'd like to read it, I'd love to show you these.
Why not?
Fantastic.
Okay. All right. So this one was from April 24th, 2019. It says, Juan Carlos is a great prof. He's funny, relatable, and really tries to get you to participate. But if you're on here to figure out if you should take Spanish at U of T, plan on not getting sick all year for more than a day. Spanish is 4 times a week, and if you miss 5 classes all year, you get a 0 for attendance. 10% of your grade. Sad. That used to be the rule. Yeah.
There's the one. Here's another one. This one's a little bit harsher.
Okay. All right. December 18th, 2021. Do not take this class as an elective. It is a lot of work. You can't CR and CR this course either, so be very sure of taking it. Prof is not understanding, even during the pandemic. He seems fun, but that doesn't really matter because he grades poorly and he's rude.
Yikes. How does a student get that perception through the screen? Do you ever think that maybe they just did bad in the class?
Yeah.
Sometimes, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, this was during COVID. It was very difficult to take a class and to teach a class online.
Mm-hmm.
I had never in my life taught a class online.
Right.
I mean,
Nobody did, really.
No,
Yeah.
really. I mean, so it was difficult. It was difficult. We had students attending from all over the world.
Yeah.
At that time. So some students were like really far away, taking classes at midnight,
right,
their time, 9 a.m. here.
Yep.
So of course that has a lot to do with how they would react to a class.
Yeah.
It was difficult. It was very challenging.
Absolutely.
I don't miss that at all.
No.
I learned how to teach online. Just last year, I taught another course online, fully online, but it's not the same anymore.
Yeah.
Everybody gets really tired. Mm-hmm. Just being on the screen all the time, it's very tiring.
It takes away from that social interaction too. It's not the same at all.
No, it's not.
Like if we were to do this podcast on Zoom, it would not have the same energy that it does, right?
Exactly, yeah.
A lot of glitching and it's just a mess.
That's right.
Okay, so here we go. We'll do the next one. Just go through these.
All right, this one is from April 4th, 2019. I took Spanish 100 and Spanish 220 as electives and achieved A+ and A, so I think I'll chime in. Professor Juan Carlos is a fantastic teacher who focuses strongly on helping students to develop spoken fluency in Spanish. He makes his classes very interactive and vibrant, so if you're shy, you may be uncomfortable in his class. Participate and have fun. Yeah, you may be uncomfortable in my class. I won't lie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get students to just this week, for example, we're talking about jobs, like your profession. What's your profession? ¿A qué te dedicas? Yo soy profesor, tú eres economista, etcétera, etcétera. And then students had to choose a picture, go to the front of the class, show the picture to everybody, and then students needed to guess what that profession was. Mm-hmm. And then I had a student who wants to become a model, and he started modeling there, for example, in front of 50 students. I have a student who is a singer. He started singing. Another one who is into theater, she started acting. So these things, they make people uncomfortable at times.
Yeah.
But I think that is what really makes you learn, especially in particular languages. Yeah. If you are able to get through this trauma or this self-consciousness of making mistakes, you're going to go far with the language. Yeah. If you are not afraid of ordering food at a Mexican restaurant, for example, if you just go in, be confident, and say whatever you want to eat in your target language, that's fine.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I used to be terrified when I was at the beginning, when I moved to the United States, every time I would go through the drive-thru at McDonald's.
Interesting.
Yeah. That was like the final exam for me every time that I would go through there.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't understand, they couldn't understand me. But then I got rid of that and I was like, oh, I can do it.
Yeah.
I can do it.
Yeah.
And you build that self-confidence and you do it.
That's awesome.
So,
yeah. So we got one last one.
You want to read it? Why don't you read it?
I can read this. Yeah. You might want to read this one. This one is actually quite flattering. I'm going to get you to read this one because I want to see your reaction to this.
Okay.
Last one.
All right. This is from January 7th, 2017. Oh, that was when I came 2016. So yeah, that first year. It says that the most attractive and intelligent Spanish professor I've ever had. It was good eye candy to see him every morning. Oh my goodness. Strongly recommend him for Spanish. You won't regret. I'm blushing now.
There you go. So people can be nice. People, it's interesting. I think the anonymity is pretty dangerous at times because people can get feisty. I made a video in the summer, not this past summer, but 2 summers ago, of reading off different professors' ratings. And my basic conclusion was that it was funny to see the correlation between the grade the person got in the course and the quality of the professor. It just seemed to line up. Whenever people do good in a class, like, oh my God, the professor was so great, blah, blah, blah. And whenever people do bad in the class, once again, externalization, I blame it on the professor. I do none of that. I have recently, when I say recently, like maybe like the past year or so, I've been trying to learn more about religion and a little bit more about God and karma and this kind of thing. I never used to be into any of that, but I just feel like sometimes there are things about the world that we can't explain.
Right.
And I was doing awful in a stats course, absolutely terrible. I needed to pass the final. I needed to do pretty good on the final, and I didn't do great throughout the course. And student teacher evaluations were coming out right before, because they come out right before the finals, right?
Right.
And I was going to do my review for the professor, and it was a professor who maybe I wasn't the biggest fan of, perhaps. I took the course though, and I needed to do great on this final. Instead of saying this course is terrible, new professor please, they're rude, whatever I wanted to call them, I did the complete opposite. Even though I didn't do great, even though the professor I didn't think was the best, this is the best professor at U of T, because it's anonymous. They can't link it to me.
Right.
This is the best professor at U of T. They're beautiful. I think we need more lectures. And you could criticize this, for example, oh, you need to be more honest in your reviews. But I just needed some good karma, say some good things about the professor, because they're there doing their job.
Right.
They're showing up. They weren't late. They didn't, skip any classes. And sometimes people just need to hear, because I know guaranteed there were reviews that were already going to be bad.
Right.
And maybe like, I get you to read these ones out. There was obviously the one bad one there that was, them calling you whatever. When you read reviews of yourself, not because this is a website, Rate My Prof, whatever, but there are actual U of T reviews. When you go through those, what's your reaction like when you see things that are like extremely nice, but then also maybe that are pretty bad? How do you process that?
At the beginning, when I started teaching, I used to take these things very personal.
Yeah.
And I would get very disappointed when I would see the negative. But now I don't take it personal at all. Yeah. I think that it's pretty valid, for people to feel however they need to feel. Mm-hmm. I do, however, think that I do and give my best when I'm doing my job. Yeah. I'm absolutely sure of what I do in my profession. I have no issues with that. But I understand that being a student, it's not like they're just taking Spanish. They're taking economics. They're taking business. They're taking math. I don't like math, for example. Yeah. I cannot do math. I wanted to become an architect when I was younger. Yeah. I didn't do that because I cannot deal with math.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So taking classes is difficult. It is difficult. Mm-hmm. And if you don't do well in a course, because maybe you are trying to do well in another course and you end up not doing your homework in Spanish, well, of course, you're not going to get a good grade in Spanish. But I think it's just, it is important to I hadn't read those. I don't read those on Rate My Professor. Yeah. The ones that I read are the official ones that come through the Faculty of Arts and Science. Yeah. And I have a combination of everything. Some people enjoy the course, some people don't. Some people think that I make them uncomfortable. Sometimes what I do, and I don't have my cell phone now, but I call a friend in Spanish. I put him on the speaker, and I have him say, hola, 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 y hola. Things like those. That just, sometimes
put them on the spot.
They just come, right. Yeah. But this is what you end up doing when you learn a language.
Absolutely.
So why not do it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I want to look up real quick, just to give a mention. In our class, you very, I'd say very kindly and thoughtfully brought the class one night after class to a Mexican restaurant.
True.
And this is the type of thing that you can do when you have a smaller class, as you were saying. And I think that it's huge that students can kind of see that community play out in that way. I just want to find the name of the restaurant. Sorry.
El Trompo. I remember. El Trompo.
Yeah. El Trompo, of course. And it was awesome. It was awesome to kind of get out there, and that I've never had that experience with a class, with a professor before, even in I'm trying to think, even in high school, no one ever did anything like that. So to do that in university, I think all the students there appreciated it. And I think that, your courses, especially Mexican history, if anyone's looking to take SPA 199, is that still the course code?
It is, yeah.
Okay, fantastic. It's a great time, and you meet great people there. And if you're teaching it, all the better. So thank you for coming on.
Gracias.
I appreciate it. Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias. Gracias a ti.
Absolutely. Do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with the students before we sign off?
I would say that don't be afraid of Spanish. Don't be afraid of Mexicans. Don't be afraid of the Spanish-speaking world. Spanish is the second most spoken language in the world in terms of native speakers.
Got it.
So if you are looking to learn Spanish, you're going to go a long way. It's going to take you to faraway places. Don't be afraid of it. Come and take our classes in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese.
Absolutely. So also, just to show this bag again, the professor was very kind to bring me some Mexican candies. I'm going to get into these later. Tomorrow or Saturday, whichever day, even in the coming week, if you're free, I'd like to bring you the gift that I got. Unfortunately, I couldn't do it on this episode. We couldn't have a nice moment here, but we'll be able to postpone that and get that sorted out. But I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Carter. Appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is Professor Juan Carlos Rocha Osornio. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. VoV Podcast, episode 75. You can follow us on Instagram @VoicesOfVic, and we will see you next Sunday. Peace out.